High Confidence, Films and Human Rights in Crisis.
Human Rights Film Festival Berlin podcast on current affairs and culture. Presented by Anna Ramskog-Lavitt.
In our second episode, we talk to Dutch director Jaap van Kruis, who is living in Bogota, and Marialejandra Moreno, a Colombian human rights expert and lawyer based in Nürnberg. We showed Jaap's very insightful documentary Unpaved Road to Peace at the Human Rights Film Festival Berlin 2019. The documentary is about a village leader in Colombia called Farid who fights for reconciliation. We were lucky enough to welcome Jaap and Farid in Berlin for our last festival. Today, I'm very delighted to speak with Marialejandra and Jaap about the current situation in Colombia and in particular the impacts of Corona on the human rights situation. Thank you so much for joining me, both of you. I will start with a question for Jaap. Jaap, you're joining us from Bogota, while Maria joins us from Nürnberg. Jaap, how are you in those strange times? How is the situation for you in Bogota?
Well, Anna, first of all, thank you for inviting me to your podcast. Yes, in Bogota, it's strange times. This is a city where 9 million people live, and it's a very lively city. There's a lot of stuff going on, and now there's almost nothing, I think they started with the quarantine a few weeks ago. People are not going onto the street. I can only go onto the street if I go to the supermarket or if I go out with my dog. But that's the story of Bogota.
So, Maria, you're from Colombia, but you currently live in Nürnberg. How is it for you, first of all, to be so far away from home in this current situation? And how does the situation feel for you in Germany?
First of all, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's such an honor for me to be able to speak about the situation in Colombia and the lockdown and this virus that is going on. And it is also a pleasure for me to be speaking with Jaap. As I mentioned, I watched his movie. And I absolutely loved it. So I'm very happy to have joined. The situation for me, I must say, it's a bit complicated because, of course, I am very privileged. I am living in Germany. I can work from home currently. But at the same time, I am still Colombian, so I try to follow the situation over there closely. And this is, of course, because most of my family and my friends are based in Colombia. So whatever happens there, it concerns me, especially in this situation that the world is facing.
Jaap shortly described how the situation looks like for him. How is the situation for your family and friends?
So for my family and friends, the situation in Colombia is still all right. They are in general quite privileged. Most of them can stay at home. They can work from home, and they are just leaving to get groceries and maybe walk the dogs in a similar situation as the one that Jaap mentioned. But I think, and in this sense, I would like to also ask Jaap about his opinion about it. I think that the reaction from the Colombian state has lacked a bit of coordination, and it seems a bit like it is not completely clear what the state wants to do or whether it has a plan in facing this crisis. So for example, the country, Colombia is under quarantine since the 25th of March, and then in the last 2 days, the Colombian president said that the country would start moving into an intelligent lockdown. And of course, this faced a lot of opposition because the question is, how intelligent can such a lockdown be in a country like Colombia? And because of this opposition and because of all the criticisms that these statements faced, the president last night, in a last-minute decision, decided to extend what it has been called as the preventive lockdown or preventive quarantine until the 27th of April. And I think we cannot really foresee exactly what is going to happen after that date. But I don't know if maybe Jaap has another perspective in that regard.
No, I heard about it, about the intelligent lockdown, but I also don't know exactly what's going to happen. What I've seen before is that there's the coordination between the big cities and the government. It's not so good. It's also when the lockdown started here in Bogota, Claudia Lopez, the mayor, she wanted lockdown also as a kind of test, and then the president said, "No, we don't need to go in quarantine," and then the mayor said, "Yes, we have to go in quarantine." So it's a bit of these battles also between cities and the government. I really don't know what's going to happen after the 27th of April. The thing is, I think nobody really knows. At the same time, and after weeks of lockdown, it's also the question, okay, how are we going to continue with this? What are going to be the effects on an economical level? All these people that live in the informal economy, also here in Colombia and in Bogota, these thousands of people that work and, get their money from working on the street, they don't have any money right now. They cannot get any food. I mean, I'm sitting here at my balcony, and a lot of people pass by and they're asking like, "Oh, please, senor, can you help me with some rice or some beans?" So I really don't know what's going to happen in the next weeks.
So, Jaap, when you're talking about the situation in the city, but your main protagonist from your film Farid is the mayor from a small village on the countryside. Do you know how he's handling the situation in his village right now?
Well, I talked to Farid recently, and I live in Bogota, which is a city of 9 million people, and Caldono is a pueblo of a few thousand people. So that's in itself is different. But there, if I go to the supermarket, I can still get food. For him, it's really difficult to get food to eat. Actually, what he eats right now is the stuff that grows on his farm. And also there, a lot of people, they depend on selling stuff on the street, and a lot of people, they spend all their savings, and they actually hope that it will be over soon because they don't know how to survive. It's actually pretty serious over there. Farid told me that there some people are more afraid of dying of hunger than of the coronavirus.
Maria, in your opinion, what are the implications in general for the human rights situation in Colombia?
So I think that the coronavirus and, of course, the lockdown that has been imposed by the state has different kind of impacts regarding human rights in the country. But I think that there are three main aspects or three main elements that I would like to highlight. And the first one is, for example, in connection with the armed conflict. So, of course, the lockdown also implies that these territories that have been neglected by the state might continue to be neglected by the authorities. And this has as a consequence that some organized armed groups might try at least to regain some territorial control over these regions. And we have already seen some of that. Like, for example, the regional government in Nariño, they were already reporting that some organized armed groups had been imposing very strict curfews. And they had even said that those who violated the curfews would be considered military objectives. So in that sense, then we're seeing this reemergence and this territorial control that the armed groups are regaining in some of the regions in the country. But at the same time, and this is still in connection with the armed conflict, we have also seen some will, at least, to carry out a ceasefire. So 1 week ago, the ELN, which is an organized armed group in the country, they declared that there would be an unilateral ceasefire of hostilities. However, this has not been the case throughout the state. I mean, we should also keep in mind that these organized armed groups operate also not completely coordinated, and there are certain regions in which the ceasefire has not been complied with. So that is the case, for example, of El Chocó. In southern Chocó, then these communities are kind of suffering a double confinement, because on the one hand, they are under lockdown, under the lockdown that the national government imposed, and also they fear for their lives if they go outside their homes, because there are still hostilities happening there. The second element, I think it's very important also to highlight the rights of those indigenous and marginalized communities. So, for example, Farid's community, Caldono is in Cauca. Cauca is a region that has many indigenous communities, which, as I said, have been neglected by the state. I would doubt about the quality or the capacity of the healthcare systems and facilities in these villages. And we have other cases in which the most basic public services, like, for example, water, are denied to these populations. And that is, for example, the case of the indigenous communities in La Guajira. So how can you really impose a lockdown, say to people that in order to prevent the spread of this virus, they should wash their hands often, when these communities don't even have access to water? And the third situation that I think it's worth highlighting is the situation of the human rights defenders in Colombia. And this is a systematic situation. As probably you know, these human rights defenders have been targeted by organized armed groups, and the state is yet to react to this situation in an appropriate manner.
I've actually read that during Corona, the situation of human rights activists and defenders, which was always very difficult and dangerous in Colombia, is even more dangerous right now because they are easier targets.
Yes. So there was an article that I read recently from The Guardian, and they said, well, the thing for these human rights defenders is that moving around puts them at risk of infection, but staying in one place makes them sitting targets. And that really stayed in my mind, because I think the situation is really, really complicated for them. And if you couple the current crisis, the current lockdown, with a state that has continuously neglected that there is a systematic attack against these human rights defenders, the situation doesn't look too good for them. It is actually more dangerous, and of course the threats have also increased in that sense.
Yeah, how is your feeling? How is the situation for journalists and filmmakers like yourself?
Well, for me and for other journalists, we can get a press card, and that gives us the privilege to go out on the street, and we can still make our stories. As I said, I'm in Bogota, and here, we can go out on the street with these special permits. So it's not that bad. What I like to head up on is that story of those social leaders. I mean, it's crazy that they're actually more in danger right now. The last few weeks, another 9 social leaders were killed, and as said, they're sitting at home, so they're a much easier target. And also the police and the army that maybe used to do some surveillance in these villages, they're not doing it right now. So it's a very critical situation. And also in Caldono a week ago, dissidents were, starting to attack police stations again in Caldono and around it. It's really like armed groups and dissidents are taking the Corona situation really as an opportunity to strengthen their influence in the areas, which is very worrisome, I think.
So we can see that Corona hurts the reconciliation process quite harshly.
Yes, I think you can say that in a way, because for human rights defenders, the situation it always was dangerous, and maybe now during this lockdown period, it's even more dangerous for them.
So in times of Corona, we talk quite a lot about solidarity, also international solidarity. So for Colombia, what would you wish from the international community? What kind of responses would be important?
I must say that international solidarity, I think it's important not just for Colombia as such. I think that this crisis has shown the world that this international solidarity must be seen globally. That even though right now, of course, we're seeing that airplanes are not going as much as they used to, and of course, we're trying to, those who can, we try to stay at home as much as possible. I think that this should not mean the reemergence of nationalistic views or anything of the sort. I think that international cooperation and solidarity is very much needed. I think that now, when it comes to international solidarity in relation to Colombia, that's a very sensitive issue. And I think that the question is rather... So the question is, the answer is yes, we need international solidarity, but the question is how and under what circumstances. And I think that one aspect that it might be quite important, it will be quite interesting to see how this plays out in the near future, is how these political tensions in Colombia, but also in the region, might have an impact on how this international solidarity takes place in the country. So, for example, Maduro also tweeted a couple of days ago that he had offered the Colombian president 2 diagnostic machines, right? These machines that they can process a lot of tests and whatnot. And we should also, I should also mention that I think it was 1 or 2 weeks ago, the only machine that the Colombian Health Institute had to process more or less 1,000 tests per day broke. And because the borders are closed and they could not import a second one. And then Maduro's offer comes to the table, and the current Colombian president, who is a bit more right-wing, he refused them. At the same time, then we don't know exactly how this might play out, for example, in relation to the relationship between Colombia and the US. Because as you may have heard as well, Trump also announced that he would offer 15,000, or I don't even remember anymore, a huge amount of money for Maduro. And then there were also some reports of some American troops that were mobilized to the border. So I think, yes, international solidarity is needed. The question is how, and how are we gonna ensure that any kind of international solidarity coming from states, powerful states like the States or the US or some European countries, does not mean some pervasive influence in the country. I think that is the main question.
Yeah, about the international solidarity thing, I think it's as Maria says, it's a sensitive topic, I would say. What I realized, what we didn't mention, we mentioned the human rights defenders that are under a bigger threat right now, but we didn't mention the 350,000 refugees from Venezuela that are in Bogota, and 1.8 million of them in the whole of Colombia. And they, for them, it was always difficult, the situation. But now with the corona, it's even tougher. Some Venezuelans that could have a place are kicked out of their hotels now, or places where to stay, because they can't pay the rent anymore. There are stories already of Venezuelans. There are a lot of Venezuelans coming into the country, and a lot of them now are thinking about walking back to Venezuela because there's really nothing here. So the situation for them is really bad. And I still hope that internationally something can be done for these refugees in one way or another, because the situation for them is, I think, the toughest.
I think when we talk about refugees, we have to talk about them globally, because I think the group that it's really hard hit by the corona crisis are refugees worldwide living in sometimes very inhumane situations and therefore being especially vulnerable?
Definitely.
In terms of being optimistic and talking about positive things, Jaap, you told me before we started this podcast that you're currently working on a really empowering project. Would you be open to tell us something about that?
Well, after showing, for me, it was very important that the film Unpaved Road to Peace that we mentioned before would not only be shown in Europe or in other countries, but especially here. So we did a tour with the film, which was amazing. We showed the film in Caldono, where the film was shot. We had ex-FARC commanders there in the audience. We had victims of the war there. Watching that film together, which is a film about reconciliation. And after the film, a lot of youngsters asked me like, hey, when is a part 2 coming of your film? And I said, well, I'm not thinking about making a part 2, but I would love it if you could make a second part of the film and the continuation of the story. And from that, and I had that idea before, but from that, and I'm actually working on that now. I'm working on some special workshops that I would like to do in these areas to give these youngsters, to teach them how to make their own short documentaries, to teach them storytelling. How do you make a story that is really, can be impactful and really, make people think about things. So that's the project that I'll be working on here is a storytelling academy. And then especially for people that cannot afford going to film school.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much both for joining me today.
Thanks.
And I hope I will speak to you both soon in better times.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Human Rights Film Festival Berlin is an initiative by Aktion gegen den Hunger and shows stories of courageous individuals and communities on both sides of the lens, bears witness to human rights violations, and creates a forum to gain new perspectives on our world. More information on the festival, the podcast, and our daily online documentary series at hrffb.de. This podcast was produced and supported by 48 Hearts Productions.